When someone pulls away, they often become the most attractive person in the room. We commonly label this sudden, electric intensity as a romantic spark, but the underlying chemistry suggests a much more volatile reaction is taking place. Psychologist Robert Zionk found that the human brain is naturally hardwired to crave unfamiliarity. When we encounter something we cannot immediately categorize or understand, our innate drive to resolve that uncertainty triggers deep curiosity. This drive frequently translates into a powerful sense of attraction. Emotionally unavailable people unintentionally exploit this biological quirk. By refusing to lay their cards on the table, they keep the brain in a state of perpetual assessment. This lack of transparency keeps you highly engaged, constantly analyzing their behavior to resolve the ambiguity. But here is why we actually stay. Many of us subconsciously seek out these emotionally distant partners because their unavailability provides a guaranteed safety net. If the other person never fully commits, we are never forced to risk true vulnerability ourselves. What we romantically call chemistry is often our own subconscious defense mechanism disguised as a fairy tale. We are walking willingly into a biological trap. To understand this trap, we have to look at the person pulling away. Avoidant calmers are rarely acting out of malice. They are simply operating on a completely different neurochemical timeline than you are. They experience what is known as conceptual love. They fall in love with the intellectual idea of a relationship, chasing the early dopamine highs of a new connection. But because many lacked reliable emotional safety in childhood, they lack the lived experience needed to build the deeper, stable oxytocin bonds that come later. This creates the anxious avoidant trap. Two people with opposite attachment strategies collide. One person moves toward connection under stress, while the other instinctively moves away. The mechanics of this cycle are punishingly simple. The harder the anxious partner pursues, the further the avoidant partner retreats. And that retreat sends the pursuer's nervous system into absolute overdrive. Sensing abandonment, your brain hits the panic button. It releases a massive flood of cortisol and other stress hormones to deal with the perceived threat to your attachment. Your heart races, your stomach drops, and your thoughts become consumed by them. But your brain fatally misinterprets this toxic flood of stress and panic as the intense passion of a soul-level connection. If this dynamic is so deeply stressful, why is it nearly impossible to simply walk away when the pain outweighs the joy? Psychologist Dorothy Teneff identified an involuntary, all-consuming cognitive state called limerence. Unlike the stable attachment of healthy love, limerence is marked by intrusive thoughts and a desperate need for validation that can impair concentration and disrupt sleep. This chart maps how limerence runs on intermittent reinforcement. You endure long, flat periods of emotional silence, interrupted by unpredictable breadcrumbs of warmth. Each tiny sign of interest triggers a massive dopamine spike in your brain, acting exactly like a slot machine paying out. This creates a deep divide in the brain between wanting and liking. Just like with drug addiction, your biology produces an intense craving drive to get that person's attention, even if you don't actually like the way they treat you. When this exact cycle of intermittent reinforcement and devaluation is intentionally weaponized by an abusive partner, it solidifies into what psychologists call a trauma bond. Limerence is an anxiety-fueled feedback loop. It hijacks your neural pathways and mimics the mechanics of chemical addiction, ensuring you stay hooked on the pursuit. There is a practical test to evaluate whether you are experiencing love or limerence. Pay attention to how you handle your partner's flaws. Limerence forces a person to rationalize or ignore toxic behavior to protect a mental fantasy. In contrast, genuine love involves seeing a partner's imperfections clearly and accepting them as they are. Researchers call this the Romeo and Juliet effect. Limerence requires obstacles, distance, and constant validation to survive. A secure love survives in peace. We repeatedly fall for this painful illusion because our adult brains are trying to solve a problem from our childhood. We are drawn to emotionally unavailable partners because they perfectly replicate the unhealed emotional environments of our youth. This excerpt from the Emotional Availability Journal outlines the clinical term for this behavior: repetition compulsion. It is the unconscious drive to seek out relationships that mirror past experiences with emotionally unavailable caregivers. in a misguided attempt to finally gain control over a familiar pain. Recognizing this pattern is the crucial first step to rewiring your brain. You have to see the dynamic as a historical illusion and a biological glitch, rather than romantic destiny. The intense anxiety and physical butterflies triggered by chasing an unavailable person serve as a warning. Far from a sign of romantic destiny, these sensations represent a nervous system sounding an alarm against a perceived threat.